Maps, they're meant to guide us, but some reveal things that are downright strange. From bizarre borders and mysterious locations to unusual natural phenomena, these maps tell stories that go far beyond geography. Here are the 15 most unusual things that we found on maps. Let's start with number 15, a man-shaped lake in Brazil. The man-shaped lake in Brazil is a strange formation that first came to the world's attention after being spotted on Google Earth, with people wondering how something like this was created. Found near Brasilia, the lake looks surprisingly like the shape of a reclining man when viewed from above. While it may at first appear to be a natural formation, the truth is that it is in fact a purposeful design. Brasilia is known for its modernist urban planning, and designed by Brazilian architect Oscar Niemeyer and urban planner Lucio Costa. The city was built in the late 1950s with the vision of creating a futuristic capital. The city's layout itself is shaped like an airplane or a bird when seen from above, with the intent of representing progress and flight, and the man-shaped lake fits in with this larger context of symbolic design. The lake's part of a wider network of artificial lakes and reservoirs that were created to support their water needs and to help manage flood control. However, unlike typical bodies of water, this particular lake was designed with aesthetic ideas in mind, and is thought to be a version of O Homem Deitado, or the reclining man, which symbolizes the harmony between human presence and nature. Now, the clear, deliberate outlines of the figure, complete with a head, torso, arms, and legs, have led to speculation that the shape holds deeper meaning, perhaps to do with indigenous Brazilian art or cosmological references. But most experts, however, believe it's a tribute to the artistic vision that can be seen throughout much of Brasilia's architecture and planning. Number 14, a giant Coca-Cola logo in Chile. Logos have, of course, been a massive part of corporate marketing for hundreds of years, with the oldest that's still in use believed to be a Stella Artois that dates back to 1366. They're used in various different ways, from being on packaging to advertising. But the record for the world's biggest logo goes to Coca-Cola, and it's so large it can only be appreciated in its entirety from above. Located in the Atacama Desert near the town of Arica, it was created in the landscape, and it's around 164 feet or 50 meters wide and 394 feet or 120 meters long, making it one of the largest advertisements ever created. Revealed in 1986, it was created to celebrate Coca-Cola's 100th anniversary, and rather than just being painted onto the ground, it was made with 70,000 empty glass Coca-Cola bottles that were carefully arranged to form the iconic logo. Originally with 100 anos written beneath it, which means 100 years, it's since been updated to 125 anos as time has passed. Well, the choice of using glass bottles was a creative tribute to the brand's packaging, but also a way to highlight the idea of recycling long before sustainability became important. And the Atacama Desert proved to be the perfect location for it. It provided a natural canvas, free from any vegetation that might obscure the logo over the years, and the area's stable, dry climate also meant that the logo would remain, with little interference from weather or erosion. The giant logo has had a wide range of reactions, from seeing it as a clever fusion of art and advertising to being a symbol of corporate intrusion into natural landscapes. Well, while it has become a tourist attraction in its own right, it'll probably best be remembered in the marketing world as a huge waste of effort though, because even though it's still there, not many people have actually heard of it. Number 13, Heart-Shaped Forest, New Caledonia. Okay, so usually you expect natural formations to take on random shapes that are really only influenced by the availability of resources and the shape of the landscape around them. So it's quite the surprise when something is found that takes a form that's far more meaningful. One of the most unusual that can be seen on maps is the heart-shaped forest in New Caledonia, which is known locally as Cœur de Veau, or Heart of Veau, and it's one of the most surprising natural landmarks in the South Pacific. Found near the small town of Veau on the west coast of Grande Terre, New Caledonia's main island, it's not a traditional forest, but is instead a mangrove formation that developed naturally into a perfect heart shape over time. It covers an area of about 10 acres, and you might expect its appearance to have been influenced by humans, but it is completely natural, and is formed by contrasting patches of dense green mangroves and lighter, more sparsely vegetated areas. The symmetrical shape and clear borders have made it a popular place for aerial photography, and it became known around the world in 1999 with the release of French photographer Yann Arthus Bertrand's book, Earth from Above. Mangroves are vital ecosystems. They provide habitat for many species and act as natural flood barriers. The Heart of Vaux has brought a focus to the beauty and importance of environments like these. Of course, instead of traveling all the way to the South Pacific to see it though, you could instead take a look at your favorite online mapping service. Number 12. The shipwreck of the SS Jassim, Sudan. The SS Jassim is one of the largest and impressive shipwrecks that you can see on Google Earth, and it can be found off the coast of the Sudan in the Red Sea. The Bolivian-registered cargo ferry ran aground on the Wingate Reef in 1991, and it's become a rusting structure that's now a popular site for divers and historians, thanks to the way that it's partially submerged in the shallow water. The vessel was originally built for transporting goods and passengers along regional routes, and it's not fully clear how it became grounded in this spot, but it's generally believed that navigational errors, possibly made worse by the dangerous reef, led to the accident. The Wingate Reef is notorious for its shallow outcrops, which have damaged countless vessels over the years because of the Red Sea's complex reef systems and constantly moving underwater terrain. Now, what makes the SS Jassim interesting, though, is its size. It measures over 265 feet, or about 81 meters long. The ship remains mostly in one piece, with its rusted hull and superstructure clearly visible from satellite images. From above, the ship almost looks unbelievable, resting in a beautiful, shallow water against the dark blues of the deeper sea. If you are there, then it's an incredible but somewhat challenging dive site, with the Red Sea being known for its clear waters and amazing ecosystems. Over the years, the wreck has become an artificial reef, and it's attracted a wide variety of coral, fish, and other species. And due to its remote location and Sudan's relatively undeveloped diving industry compared to neighboring Egypt, though, the SS Jassim isn't visited as much. It's easy to view in satellite imagery, though, and because of the specific conditions of the site where it became stranded, it is one of the clearest shipwrecks visible from space. Number 11. The Frozen Pyramid in Antarctica. Originally having a tropical environment, the continent of Antarctica drifted towards the South Pole over many millions of years, and it's believed to have begun to be covered with ice sheets around 360 million years ago. Of course, since humans have been around, it has been inhospitable to us, and after the first explorers are thought to have seen it in the early 19th century, only a limited number of people are able to go there. This means that for most of us, the closest we'll ever get is by looking at satellite imagery and maps of the coldest place on Earth. And if you look closely, you'll be able to find some very strange things. One of the most peculiar is the so-called Frozen Pyramid, which is a structure in the Ellsworth mountain range. This natural formation looks like a near-perfect pyramid with 4 sharply triangular sides and a distinct peak. Its shape, which is clearly visible on satellite imagery, has of course led to theories about its origins, with suggestions that it's the ruins of an ancient civilization or evidence of alien visitors. While the scientific consensus is, though, it's all natural. The Ellsworth mountain range is one of the tallest in Antarctica, and it's a place full of towering peaks and ridges that have been carved over millions of years by glacial activity. Geologists have shown that pyramid-shaped mountain is probably the result of a geological feature called a nunatak, which is when a peak of rock emerges through the ice sheets or glaciers and it's exposed to the elements while the surrounding ice recedes. The sharp angular appearance of the frozen pyramid is because of frost weathering and erosion forces that have done this over thousands of years, and similar formations can also be found in mountain ranges across the world, including the Matterhorn in the Swiss Alps, which has also a pyramid-like structure. Number 10. The Dark Red Lake in Iraq. When you think of what a lake should look like, you probably imagine a spectrum of colors that you'd expect, mainly different blues and greens. There are times, though, when water can look very different, and a number of unusual colored lakes have been discovered in recent years by people looking around the world on Google Earth. Probably the most surprising of all was found in 2007, when a lake in Iraq appeared a deep dark red color. Found near Sadir City, which is a district of Baghdad, everyone who saw it had their own theory about why it looked like that. Many people suggested that it was waste, perhaps from a meat processing facility, of which there are quite a few in that particular region. But to make things more mysterious, there was never any official explanation from authorities in Iraq. While it certainly looks strange, that's not the only lake in the world that's taken on a coloration like this, and there are two other explanations that have happened elsewhere that could also explain this one too. One is that it could have been caused by algal blooms, specifically red algae or cyanobacteria, which are known to produce vivid red or pink colors in water under certain conditions. This phenomenon, which is called a red tide, can happen because of a combination of high nutrient levels, warm temperatures, and stagnant water. While red tides are more commonly associated with coastal waters, similar blooms have been known to occur in freshwater lakes and ponds. But rarely does it cause such a deep and uniform color as we see in this lake, so it's unlikely to fully explain it. The other possibility is industrial pollution, as Baghdad has faced major environmental issues over the years because of war, poor infrastructure, and lack of regulatory oversight. Factories, chemical plants, and other industrial facilities release untreated waste into rivers and lakes, and this can lead to strange colors and dangerous conditions. But the true cause of the Red Lake's coloration still remains a mystery, and soon after the image was captured, further satellite images show that the lake began to turn back to a more typical color, which shows that the phenomenon was a temporary one. Well, this suggests that it was a one-time environmental event or a temporary change in local industrial practices, but we may never know for sure. It is an interesting example, though, of how modern technology like satellite imagery can reveal unexpected features in our world, and the ability to look at the planet from above can be invaluable for scientific discovery and environmental monitoring, but it also reveals mysterious phenomena that we never knew had been out there before. Number 9. The Giant Tree Guitar, Argentina. Forests and natural formations around the world can take on peculiar and unexpected shapes all on their own, but our knowledge of cultivation and the ability to transform the landscape can lead to the creation of strange but fascinating structures too. This is what's happened in Argentina, where there's a formation of trees that have been perfectly arranged into the shape of a guitar. Found in the Pampas region in the Cordoba province, it's visible from satellite images, and more than 2/3 of a mile or 1 kilometer long, it's made up of around 7,000 cypress and eucalyptus trees, making it quite the feat of landscape design. It was all the idea of Pedro Martin Ureta, a local farmer and rancher who first planted the forest in memory of his wife Graciela. Graciela had been a great lover of music and the guitar, and she once suggested to Pedro that they create a guitar-shaped forest on their land. She imagined the strings being made of cypress trees and the body being outlined with eucalyptus, creating a living symbol of her love for music and nature. At the time, Pedro thought the idea was impractical, but he decided to take on the challenge in 1977 in honor of her memory. In the early 1980s, with the help of his children and local workers, Pedro began the painstaking process of planting thousands of trees in the exact shape of a guitar. The body was, as had been imagined, made from eucalyptus trees with their vibrant, broad leaves, and the strings were represented by dark cypress trees, whose narrow, straight trunks created perfect lines. Planting it out, though, was difficult, especially with the climate of the Pampas region with its strong winds and ever-changing weather. Many of the saplings had to be replaced a number of times, but eventually his perseverance paid off. Over the decades, the forest has grown into a stunning, living monument, and the planned contrast between the dark cypress strings and the lighter eucalyptus creates an unexpected visual effect when you first see it. Of course, only locals really knew about it until it was imaged by satellites for Google Earth, and then, once explorers discovered it, Graciela's idea could be enjoyed by people across the world for a very long time. Number 8. The Eye of the Sahara, Mauritania. The Sahara Desert in North Africa is the largest hot desert on the planet, covering an area of more than 3.6 million square miles, or 9.2 million square kilometers. Today, it's mostly covered in sand and is an inhospitable place for most species, but it's not always this way. In fact, over the past few 100,000 years, it's alternated every 20,000 years or so between being a vast desert and a savanna grassland, and it's expected to turn green again in around 15,000 years. This cycle has led to the development and preservation of some interesting structures across the desert, with perhaps the strangest and most surprising being the Reshat structure, which has become known as the Eye of the Sahara. Found in the Adrar Plateau of central Mauritania, near to the small town of Ouadane, this enormous geological feature looks like a giant bullseye or spiral that's been carved into the desert, with a diameter of around 25 miles or 40 kilometers. From the ground, though, it's hard to tell that you're in something, as the ridges and valleys blend into the desert landscape. It's only from above or aerial satellite perspective that its nearly perfect concentric rings can be seen in their true glory. So before it was possible to see it from these angles, no one really knew it was there. The outer rings are made up of types of sedimentary rock, while the inner rings are made of older metamorphic rocks that have been exposed over time. For a long time, it was also a mystery about how a structure like this formed. The earliest theory was that it was an impact crater that had been created by a meteor strike, but further studies have shown that this isn't the case, because apart from the shape, there are no other typical signs of an event like that, such as the presence of shocked quartz or certain other minerals. Instead, geologists now believe that it's what's known as a deeply eroded geological dome that was formed by a process called symmetrical uplift. The circular shape is the result of millions of years of erosion that have exposed layers of rock that were uplifted in a dome-like formation during the Proterozoic eon over 2 billion years ago. The exact process that led to this is still not fully understood, but it's likely to have been to do with volcanic activity or tectonic movements beneath the Earth's crust. The central part of the structure contains igneous rock, which are of volcanic origin, and over time the softer rock eroded away. But interestingly, the surrounding region is also full of archaeological sites, including prehistoric tools, rock carvings, and relics of ancient human settlements. These artifacts suggest that the area was more suitable to live in, which provides more evidence for the changing nature of the Sahara Desert as a whole. Moving on to number 7, the Badlands Guardian in Canada. As part of our puzzle-solving abilities, human brains are very good at looking for patterns in images to try to further understand them, but this can sometimes result in us seeing things that aren't really there. It is, for example, why we see shapes in clouds, but there are times when nature produces something that looks so clearly like something recognizable that you can't help but wonder if some other force is at play. That's the case with the Badlands Guardian, which can be seen in satellite imagery near Medicine Hat in Alberta, Canada, and looks just like a human head, with a clear nose, lips, and chin, as well as what looks like a feathered headdress. And when you see it from above, it's clearly an ancient guardian figure that's been etched into the landscape and looking out over the Canadian Badlands. Amazingly, no one knew about it until the early 2000s when it was spotted on satellite imaging. The formation covers almost 1,000 feet or several hundred meters across the prairie landscape of southeastern Alberta, which is an area that's known for its unique rock formations and deposits of fossils. Rather than having been purposefully put there, geologists have explained that the Badlands Guardian is, in fact, a typical example of erosion. The face-like structure is the result of rainwater erosion cutting into the soft sedimentary rock and clay. Now, this place is generally a dry place, and when it rains, the showers are pretty intense, so huge amounts of water cascade through the landscape. Imagery, though, is quite misleading because instead of being a hilly structure that rises out of the land, the Guardian is instead a valley that's been carved into the ground. In a further twist, the Guardian also appears to be wearing an earbud in its ear, but there just so happens to be a man-made road and an oil well in exactly the right position. Thought to be no more than a few hundred years old, the Badlands Guardian is now culturally significant for many people, particularly because of the indigenous heritage in Canada. The formation's resemblance to a human face wearing a headdress links it to First Nations peoples in the region, and while there's no evidence to suggest that the formation was known to the indigenous communities before its discovery on satellite imagery, it's hard not to feel like there's some meaning to it. Number 6. The Desert Lips in Sudan. Located in the Bayuda Desert, which is part of the Nubian Desert in northeastern Sudan, the Desert Lips is another bizarre geological feature that can be seen on satellite imagery. And it looks just like a pair of giant human lips because of its symmetrical curved outlines and contrast against the surrounding landscape. The formation is made up of 2 parallel curved ridges that are made from layers of sedimentary rock that have been exposed through erosion over many millions of years. These natural ridges, combined with the shadows that are cast from the sun, create the illusion of full, well-defined lips. The size of the formation, stretching almost 1,000 feet or several hundred meters, make it one of the strangest natural features in the region. Geologists believe that this structure was formed through a combination of tectonic activity and wind erosion. The desert here, like much of northeastern Africa, is influenced by the slow movement of tectonic plates. Over time, the shifts of these plates cause the layers of sedimentary rock to buckle and lift up, which creates ridges and valleys. The lip-like shape of the formation is then purely a coincidence and the result of natural processes, but that hasn't stopped people from suggesting other ideas about it. While there have been some ideas of ancient civilizations or symbolic meanings, there's no archaeological evidence to show that the desert lips were modified by humans at all. The region around the lips, though, was a hugely important place for the ancient Nubian civilizations, including the Kingdom of Kush, which lived along the Nile River and left behind archaeological sites. In modern times, though, the desert lips are extremely remote and mostly inaccessible, deep within the Sudanese desert, far from any major cities or tourist routes. So as a result, it hasn't become a popular landmark to visit, but Google Earth is the only way that most people will ever be able to see it. Number 5. Italy's giant pink bunny. With the resolution that's available from satellites these days, the last thing you'd expect when looking at a countryside is to see any animals. But things took a strange turn in 2005 with the creation of a novel artwork in Italy. In the hills of the Italian Alps, a gigantic, bright pink knitted bunny appeared. It was too huge to be an accident or a prank and was, in fact, an art installation called Hassa, meaning hair. Created by Austrian art collective Gelatin, it was 200 feet or 61 meters long, 20 feet or 6 meters high, and it was easily visible from satellites. Gelatin is a group that's known for producing provocative and unconventional art, and they designed Hassa to be more than just something to look at. The bunny was intended as an interactive experience, giving hikers the chance to climb, sit, and even take a nap on its soft, knitted body. The artist wanted people to be able to rest on the bunny like it was a comfy sofa in the middle of nature, turning the traditional relationship with art upside down. There was, too, an intentional darkness in its creation. The bunny, even though it was cute, lay on the hillside as if it had fallen over or had been thrown away, with its mouth open in a silent scream. The materials that were used were strange, too, as they made it with soft pink wool and stuffed it with straw, which made it surprisingly sturdy in the mountain weather. The idea, though, was that it would slowly decay over time, and while the hope was that it would last until around 2025, allowing it to gradually blend back into the landscape, the process happened way more quickly. By the early 2010s, the bunny had already lost much of its original glory, and by the mid-2010s, it collapsed into a sagging pile of fabric and straw. Its discovery on Google Maps, though, brought it new life and a permanence into the installation. There was a huge online conversation about it. Without knowing why it was there, there was speculation about where it had come from, with suggestions including that it was an alien signal, a failed marketing stunt, or an abandoned movie prop. Today, very little remains of Hassa, apart from small lumps of straw and fabric, and it's been reclaimed by the earth as the artist wanted. It will, though, now live on forever through photographs, stories, and the countless people who have found it on online mapping services. Number 4. Green Circles, Saudi Arabia. If you take a look at Saudi Arabia on a platform like Google Earth, specifically in the country's desert regions like the Wadi al-Shahan Basin or the Al-Kharj and Tabuk, you start to notice something strange against the yellow sandy backdrop. A series of massive, perfectly circular patches of green. Their geometric precision and scale have convinced many people that they're proof of alien activity or mysterious ancient civilizations. But they are, in fact, the result of advanced agricultural engineering techniques that have been designed to make it possible to grow food in one of the largest continuous sandy deserts on the planet. The green circles here are formed through a farming method that's known as the center pivot irrigation, and is a technique that has revolutionized agriculture in regions like this around the world. Introduced to Saudi Arabia in the 1970s, this method uses a long, rotating sprinkler system that's mounted on wheeled towers that pivot around a central point. As the sprinkler arm rotates, it sprays water in a circular pattern and forms the green circles that are visible. Each circle can be between 1,300 to 3,900 feet, or about 400 to 1,200 meters in diameter, depending on the size of the equipment. The crops that are commonly grown here using this method include wheat, alfalfa, barley, corn, and even vegetables and fruits like watermelons and potatoes. The success of the method is also down to the use of fossil water, which is ancient groundwater that's been trapped in underground aquifers for thousands or even millions of years. These aquifers, which are known as non-renewable fossil aquifers, were filled during prehistoric times when the climate of the Arabian Peninsula was much wetter. The reliance on fossil water does, though, raise concerns. Unlike water or rain-fed aquifers, fossil water isn't replenished. Once it's gone, it won't be refilled in our lifetimes. And over the decades, studies have shown that Saudi Arabia's groundwater reserves are quickly being used up. But amazingly, by the 1980s, Saudi Arabia had become one of the world's largest wheat producers, and it was even able to export surplus crops. By the 1990s, though, environmental costs of this expansion became clear, and in 2008, Saudi Arabia announced plans to phase out domestic wheat production by 2016 to conserve water, instead focusing on importing grains. In recent years, however, the country's invested heavily in desalination technology and hydroponic farming as an alternative means, meaning that as the center pivot method of irrigation is phased out, these green circles that can be seen today will start to vanish over the coming years. Number 3. Structures and patterns in the Gobi Desert, China. Covering an area of around 500,000 square miles or 1.3 million square kilometers in northern China, the Gobi Desert is the 6th largest desert on the planet. Rather than being a hot and sandy expanse, it's a cold place where frost and snow can form on its dunes, and most of it's made up of exposed rock. It's a barren place, but satellite imagery in recent years has revealed something unexpected. A series of strange geometric shapes, grids, and structures carved into the desert surface. They were first spotted in the early 2010s when users of Google Earth began seeing these unusual formations. The huge scale and precision of these designs soon led to speculation about their purpose and origin. Unlike petroglyphs elsewhere in the world, like the Nazca lines, these aren't representative images or remnants of civilizations that once lived here, and it didn't take long before people started suggesting that they were alien messages or the sites of secret military experiments or weapons testing. There were other suggestions about hidden mega-projects or underground facilities, or that they could be related to climate control experiments or geoengineering projects. Experts soon stepped in to give a more reasonable explanation, but in many ways it was just as fascinating and a sign of the technological advances in China. That's because they're most likely used for military testing and satellite calibration. A lot of these geometric patterns here in the Gobi Desert are similar to calibration targets that have been built elsewhere that are used to test the resolution and accuracy of spy satellites. These large-scale grids and shapes allow engineers to fine-tune imaging equipment, making sure these satellites can accurately capture and interpret images that they take of the Earth's surface. But beyond military use, some of the other structures in the Gobi are believed to be for scientific and technological purposes. For example, large-scale solar power installations have been built in parts of the desert with massive arrays of solar panels, and these installations are part of China's drive towards renewable energy. There's also evidence that some of the structures are to do with space exploration. The Gobi Desert has been used for testing rovers and spacecraft, and because of its similarities to the Martian terrain and China's Mars rover program, which successfully landed the rover on the Red Planet in 2021, likely benefited from desert-based testing. Number 2. Abandoned rocket launch site in Kazakhstan. A series of abandoned rocket launch pads in Kazakhstan at the Baikonur Cosmodrome is a fascinating reminder of the Soviet Union's plans during the space race and the decline of some of its space infrastructure in recent times. It's located in the steppes of southern Kazakhstan near the town of Baikonur. This vast complex was once the center of Soviet and Russian space exploration. The Cosmodrome was originally opened in 1955 as the Soviet Union's main spaceport and missile testing facility. It was chosen for its remote location and flat terrain, and it was from here that Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite, was launched on October 4, 1957, marking the beginning of the space age. Baikonur also made history on April 12, 1961, as the launch site that was used when Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space aboard Vostok 1. And there was a time when tens of thousands of engineers, scientists, and military personnel worked there. Well, the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, though, changed everything. Kazakhstan came to be independent and inherited the land, but Russia kept control over the Cosmodrome. And as a result, several launch pads and facilities were abandoned due to lack of funding, maintenance, and interest. One of the most famous abandoned sites here is Site 110, which is also known as the N1 Launch Complex. This was the site built for the N-1 rocket, which was the Soviet answer to NASA's Saturn V. After 4 failed launches, the program was scrapped and the launch site was abandoned, and today satellite images show rusting remains of this massive launch pad with its metal structures now twisted and corroded. The abandoned Site 112 is now where 2 Buran shuttles and a prototype Energia rocket were left to deteriorate. In 2002, part of the roof collapsed, destroying one of the orbiters, and the other shuttles, along with other pieces of equipment, remain exposed to the elements and visible through the satellite images. While many parts of Baikonur have fallen into disuse, the Cosmodrome is still an active launch site, and Russia continues to launch Soyuz missions to the International Space Station here. Kazakhstan and Russia have occasionally discussed the idea of bringing some abandoned sections back into service, but newer facilities like the Vostochny Cosmodrome are now being developed within Russian territory to reduce dependence on Baikonur, so it seems unlikely. Number 1. The airmail arrows in the United States. Across the U.S., there's a strange series of structures that for decades few people knew about apart from those who relied on them. Now, through mapping services, you're able to see hundreds of giant concrete arrows, some that are more than 70 feet or 21 meters long and seemingly point to nowhere. They are, though, what remains of the Transcontinental Airway System, which was a navigational network that was developed in the early 1920s to guide airmail pilots across the country. This was, of course, a time before the development of advanced navigation tools like GPS or even reliable radio beacons. So these arrows provided crucial visual cues for pilots flying low across vast landscapes. Today, many of them can be seen, overgrown in rural fields, deserts, and long-abandoned airstrips. The U.S. Airmail Service first began on May 15, 1918, with flights between Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York City. These early flights were experimental, and the aircraft were usually modified World War I biplanes with open cockpits and very few instruments. It wasn't an easy job, and pilots faced various challenges, from mechanical failures to unpredictable weather and poor visibility. As the demand for faster mail grew, the U.S. Postal Service expanded its routes westward. By the early 1920s, it was clear that a more reliable system was needed. This is when the federal government developed a transcontinental airway system and built a series of lighted beacons and concrete arrows. The first major airmail route to use the beacon and arrow system was the New York to San Francisco transcontinental route in 1924. It covered a distance over 2,600 miles or 4,200 kilometers and included more than 500 beacon sites. The system significantly improved the speed and reliability of airmail delivery, cutting the coast-to-coast delivery time from 83 hours to less than 30 hours. Pilots could now fly at night and be able to rely on the beacons and arrows to guide them through even the most remote regions like the Rocky Mountains, the Great Plains, and the deserts of the Southwest. By the 1930s, though, advances in radio navigation technology meant that these arrows and beacons became obsolete, and the government began decommissioning the beacon system in the 1940s. Some were repurposed or destroyed, while others were forgotten about. As they were built to last, though, many arrows remained intact and became part of the American landscape. In recent years, people have begun to remember the airmail arrows because of digital mapping tools like Google Earth, and today, hundreds are still visible in states like Utah, Nevada, Arizona, Montana, and California. Some are even located on public land and can be visited, while others are on private property or in restricted areas, accessible only through aerial imagery. Thanks for watching. Click here to watch the next video, 15 Fascinating Discoveries on Google Earth. Thank you to our channel members.